One of the defining characteristics of the current historical epoch we find ourselves in is that the expert class, the political expert class especially, but also the expert class in other areas, are finding themselves running out of credibility and losing any status that they once had in the eyes of the public. And there's no better exemplar of this phenomenon than Allan Lichtman, I would say right now, the disgraced pollster whose keys to the White House were held as the ultimate Nostradamus-like predictive mechanism by which to gauge the eventual condition of a presidential race, which ultimately failed in this case. In this case, they predicted that Kamala Harris would win, when in all reality, Donald Trump won. He won handily. And so Lichtman has been going around media blaming everyone but his own mechanisms for this. And he's been saying rather outrageous things. But the big story is not that Lichtman himself failed in his own wisdom. The big story is that he is a product of a broader phenomenon that has unfortunately been burdening down the American public for years. And that phenomenon needs to be evaluated, and its eventual end, which I do believe is going to end, also needs to be celebrated by every thinking American. So in this video, we're going to take a little bit of an evaluation of what he's been saying, and we're going to analyze it within the context of history and in the context of the dominant ideas that the expert class has been pushing on Americans over the past few decades. Before we get into that, I hope you're doing well. I'm Chris Vermont. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoy political and social commentary with a philosophical bent, then I must implore you, please like, share, comment, subscribe. Do whatever you can, my friends, to get this channel successful. Even if you disagree with me, we are almost at 20,000 subscribers, my friends. I'm so excited. And if you guys want to think a little bit deeper, a little bit more critically about some of the issues that plague our society and infest our world, then I would encourage you to please like, share, comment, subscribe. I promise you, you will not regret it. Thank you guys so much, and now please enjoy the video. So, Allan Lichtman, in the wake of the election, in the wake of the sort of disproving of his keys, has been going around mainstream media doing guest appearances, essentially blaming exigent circumstances, in his words, and paraphrasing essentially what he means, for the failure of his predictive method. He went on News Nation, for example, and blamed the rise of misinformation and disinformation and Elon Musk for the failure of his prediction. And I would like you guys to watch a little bit of this right here.
Yes, as I said, things could go wrong. There could be unprecedented events that change the pattern of 160 years of history. That's what happened here. Two things. Number one, disinformation. We've always had disinformation, but disinformation has exploded to an unprecedented degree. You talked about a grievance election, but a lot of that grievance was driven by disinformation. Starts with Fox News and conservative media, conservative podcasters with tens of millions of views. But we've seen something brand new this time. The 300 billionaire Elon Musk putting his thumb on the scales through his control of X, formerly Twitter. It's been reported that his misinformation has had billions, literally billions of views. And this has spread to every aspect of this election. There is misinformation about everything about the economy, inflation, jobs, unemployment, the stock market, growth. There is vast disinformation about undocumented immigrants, that they're supposedly killers who are out to get you.
Now, some of you may simply say that this is a lack of self-awareness on his part, which, by the way, it very well may be. But I think this underlies a much broader phenomenon that has been happening for a very long time and must be talked about in the most fruitful way possible. I think Allan Lichtman's response here demonstrates both the fragility and the downfall of the political expert class. So allow me to explain. History moves in epochs. There are just certain themes that define particular historical periods. The Enlightenment, for example, was defined by the taking of ideas from previous centuries and making them manifest into reality by the explosion of reason the explosion of debate and the explosion of different forms of government, like republicanism, leading to the downfall of certain systems like monarchy, so on and so forth, by basically reshaping how we viewed society and how we viewed human nature. The Industrial Revolution was defined as this sort of explosion of human potential that drastically made life both more efficient and also made life a little bit more easier, but of course had its own complications, but essentially thrust us into the future, so on and so forth. So in these different epochs, there are certain themes that define what those periods are. And for the past 120 plus years, the epoch that the American political system has existed under has been the epoch of progressivism, and particularly progressive managerialism. The progressive managers essentially were predicated upon a European idea, particularly a Prussian idea, that the experts had the insight, the knowledge to engineer the best kind of society conducive to the progressive history, which would make society in this worldview, a better place to live. And these experts should then therefore be empowered to wield political power towards the direction their expertise points them in. This has led, of course, to the rise of the administrative state. This led to the rise of numerous bureaucratic agencies that were justified upon this very basis. And this, of course, has led to an era of American citizens being treated more like serfs as opposed to citizens. Well, this didn't happen in a vacuum. In the 20th century, there was also a different phenomenon that was arising in academia that actually fed into this idea of managerialism lording over the American public, and this was the idea of scientism. Scientism is essentially this dogmatic appraisal of science, viewing it as the end-all, be-all, the final source of knowledge and the final adjudicator of all physical questions. In other words, science was viewed to be more important than religion or philosophy because science apparently had everything we needed to understand the world. So in the view of the people that supported scientism, science is essentially the only thing you need to understand the world and to comprehend reality. Well, the problem with scientism is that it treats all questions about the world as physical questions. Not all questions about the world can be measured. Not everything is measurable, and even science cannot measure everything. It will admit that. Then you understand that science is a very limited way of processing knowledge. But also, if you go a little bit further, and you understand that science itself is simply a single tool of measurement. It is not a doctrine, nor is it meant to be a dogma. It is a tool of measurement, a method by which we measure things. Then you understand that unless that method is informed by higher principles, that method can produce nothing. It is impotent. Everything presupposes other things in order for it to be coherent. Right? So scientism was a foul doctrine, but there is a different kind of scientism that hasn't actually been attacked or disproven as much as it should be, that has in fact impacted how the media presents information and how our institutions continue to be governed, and that is political scientism. Political scientism tries to reduce all political questions to questions of specialization and questions of expertise. Allan Lichtman is, in my opinion, the embodiment of the problems of political scientism. Because Allan Lichtman, as both a pollster and as a commentator whose entire credibility in the public sphere is tied towards his ability to measure political issues with his methods, is reliant on people viewing his ways of interacting with politics as the primary or the best or the end-all be-all. In other words, Allan Lichtman, as a specialist, is a benefactor and a perpetuator of political scientism. Allow me to explain this a little bit more. You can see this in how Lichtman, instead of embracing the failures of his own keys, decides to blame other people. If his keys didn't produce the outcome he thought they would, as they didn't, it's not that they failed. It's that something else from outside of the system of specialization came in and ruined everything. So, for example, Disinformation came in, and according to this worldview, anything that is outside of this specialized system is somehow disinformation, it's somehow not trustworthy if it doesn't come from an official source. So from him, disinformation came in, and that swayed minds, and the keys didn't fail. It was more so society, which the keys measured, that had to fail. Do you see this totalizing system of measuring politics and political questions with science as opposed to seeing them as simply broader phenomenon that have to involve investigating human desire? Because ultimately, politics is simply a system of governance. And when you're in a republic, a system of governance is going to reflect the people. So, therefore, in order to understand politics, you must first understand the people and their culture. But if you treat politics simply as a scientific game that has no connection to reality beyond what can be measured, then you're not going to understand why those tools like Lichtman's keys actually have limits within reality, which is why disinformation becomes a convenient excuse when the actual logic of these tools is not as expansive as those whose credibility is staked upon them and those who use them would like you to believe. In other words, Allan Lichtman is more of a failure of political scientism than anything else, because the political questions he was trying to evaluate escaped his confined methods and it went towards broader issues. No matter how much you try to measure public sentiment, if a person has an emotional change of heart, if a person is seeing things happen within their communities that impacts them personally, if a person does not necessarily report how they feel, but they instead vote how they feel, then that will change the course of things. And anyone that is intelligent politically understands this, and they understand that if you really want to appeal to voters, you must first appeal to the issues that matter to them. So the expert class are not just the bureaucratic managers that have the ability to, by fiat, rule over public life, although they certainly are that. The experts are also those whose entire careers, entire vocation in life is to measure society within the narrow lens of their methods and of their programs, and to view society consequently in those ways, at least in public, since that's where their credibility derives from, and then to tell us about where things are going. But I think what's very important is that people are beginning to reclaim a sense of self-governance. People are beginning to realize that no matter how many degrees you have, education does not equal wisdom. It simply equals information. And how you get information is almost as important, if not more important, than what kind of information you get. And for that reason, I think we're going to continue to see the lowering of the stock of people like Allan Lichtman, because political scientism is unraveling. And that, by the way, is a fundamentally good thing. For a very long time, and I'll close on this, Americans have been very skeptical of the pretensions of people in academia. Throughout history, historians would call this anti-intellectualism and a preference of folk wisdom. But it was actually much more than that. It was more so an understanding that there are certain common ideas that are common sense, really, that can allow us to live good lives and have good societies. And that when we abstract ourselves from those concrete ideas and we go into areas where we're more concerned about what our imagination says or what something on a paper divorced from reality says, more than from what reality itself says, we're going to get things that are nonsensical and unwise, like a man believing he's Nostradamus because his methods have apparently worked in the past, and his methods are somehow unassailable on their own unless there's something that disrupts them. We have to get to a point in our country, and we are, where people begin charting their own intellectual journeys. And I think that's going to continue to happen with the rise of digital media, and that's going to put people like Allan Lichtman out of a job. Now, one more thing. The excuse of disinformation is quite interesting, because a lot of people don't understand the history of the word disinformation. So I'll give you a very brief splurb. I actually did a very big video about this. If you want to watch it, it's going to be in the description down below. But disinformation comes from the Russian word desinformatia, which, by the way, didn't even have a counterpart in English in the 1970s. So the inclusion of the word disinformation into the English language actually came very late in the game. It was actually quite recent, within the past 40 years. And the word disinformatia quite literally was itself disinformation, quite literally was itself a lie. It was an attempt for the Soviet Union to phrase any information that was disfavorable towards them that came from the West or that came at all. So they would attempt to say, for example, that if the West said that there's like a dictatorship in the Soviet Union, that's disinformation because it comes from the West. Literally built into the definition of disinformation was the idea that the West only lies about the Soviet Union and that every unfavorable thing about the Soviet Union itself was nothing more than a lie. So in other words, it was a word created to reflect an agenda, not a word created to reflect meaning and reality. And yet this single word, which exploded in use around 2019 and exploded and began being more used after John Podesta said that disinformation was the reason that Hillary Clinton lost the campaigns in 2016, this single word has become the operative phrase of the political class because it can terminate thoughts that are contrary to what is orthodox, and most importantly, it can frame the way people think and keep them in a comfortable way of thinking that may defy wisdom or may defy actually finding the truth. So I would encourage all of you, next time you hear the word disinformation, recognize that it was literally created in a propaganda lab by one of Joseph Stalin's associates to be a shield against any criticism against the Soviet Union. That does not necessarily mean that the word itself, as it develops, is necessarily bad, but it does mean that the word is kind of being used in a certain way, in a similar way, to be a shield for the institutions whose credibility may be challenged by voices that come from the outside of them, and the way to shut them down is by calling them kooks and disinformation, when in all reality, they may be simply somebody having an iconoclastic and uncommon perspective. We need experts. But we don't need experts to be the sole source of information. We need experts to give us their appraisal of information so that we, the people, can then therefore analyze their appraisal, or other people who are just as smart as them, who are not credentialed, can also analyze their appraisal, and we can have a debate within the open marketplace of ideas. That's what good epistemology looks like in a free society, and that's what Allan Lichtman, in my opinion, is completely against. My friends, like, share, comment, subscribe. Do whatever you can to help us get our channel successful. My friends, study history, study philosophy, remain morally convicted, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.